Hello and welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to be showing off all the books that I've read in the past year or so. This is part one of it because there's fucking so many, because I just... See however many books you've read, man. I've read fucking 3 times that, so good luck trying to be as cool as me. But yeah, I'm going to show off what I've read, what I think about it. A lot of the stuff here is going to be classic novels, just because that's what I like. I tend not to read anything that's modern, to be honest with you, unless it's people like Cormac McCarthy and Easton Ellis and things like that. And I'm sure there's going to be hundreds of books from the last 20 years that I'll eventually love and read and things like that. But since I got properly into reading about autumn last year, I've just really been wanting to read what people consider to be the ultimate classics, the canons and all that shit. So yeah, this is about it's about 10 books here in this first part, going from an alphabetical order from A to D. And yeah, this is basically just what I've read so far. So let's start with The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. I enjoyed this book. It was very interesting, although yeah, so this book is about a sort of theocracy in America where like there was a war and this militant Christian group won, and they basically made a America where women are forced to dress like modestly and things like that, and cover themselves and not look up at men and not turn round, and they have these visors in front of their habits. It's like a nun's habit, and they're only allowed to do certain things, and they basically live to serve men, and it's a pretty bleak existence. And this is the story of Offred, who can remember before all this happened, and she's trying to me, that this book is about her trying to salvage any remnant of individuality, as well as like the world that she knew before. But this book is also, not a lot happens in it. It's kind of like if you imagine a day in the life sort of thing. There's no driving, plot or anything like that. She ends up in a number of sort of clandestine affairs that are fully illegal, and it's high risk for her. But it's the only way that she sort of, I guess, feels alive. And yeah, it is a very good book. It's a sort of like the plight, like what a woman would have to endure under a sort of theocracy. Some say that it has ties to religions that exist now, and I'm going to keep quiet about that because yeah, but it's a very good book, very interesting. I think this one has, like, at the end of it, yeah, it has historical notes, which I don't know if it's part of every single edition of this book, but it's sort of, the story ends here, and then the historical notes is someone finding Offred's diary years and years later, and them sort of looking over it and trying to figure out who Offred was and what the story was, and all that sort of thing. But yeah, a very good book. I thought it was the main character Offred, I really liked the way she was written. Some of the things that she would think and things like that. It's a good book. It's a good book. I'm waffling, talking shit, but yeah, I would recommend this. Next we have some Jane Austen here with Sense and Sensibility. This was one of the first books that I actually read when I started getting into reading again, like classics. And this is her first, well, it's not her first stories, but it's her first like novel in her adult life. And this is a story of, let me remember their names, Eleanor and... Eleanor, I'm just going to look, Marianne. So Eleanor and Marianne are 2 sisters who live in sort of what I imagine to be Edwardian era England. It might not be fucking Edwardian, I don't know when it is, but and they basically live in the countryside, and their aim is to find men and marry them, although in 2 different fashions. One of the sisters, I believe is Marion, who is the sense part of this, so you could split this title into the 2 sisters. So sense So Marianne is more of a disagreeable character insofar as she doesn't really take shit from anyone, even if they're lords and ladies and dukes and whatever. She has a lot of convictions, and she knows what she likes and what she doesn't like, and she knows how she likes people speaking to her and things like that. So she chooses to be a bit more disagreeable, but in a way that's that makes her come across as the only real one there. And then there's the other sister, the sensibility side, and Eleanor. I could have got these mixed up, it has been a while, but Eleanor is more sensibility, so she's more aware of societal norms and things that you should be doing and shouldn't be doing in high society and things like that. And basically it's the story of them trying to find love, but there's a lot of sorrow through it and things like that, and it doesn't all go well. There's a character called Willoughby who completely fumbles the bag, man. He completely fumbles it. But it's an interesting story. I think Jane Austen in general, while her books might not be written for someone like me, I can find something in it. She's a great writer. She's very good at describing emotion, and also, like, what would the word be? Like, she's very good at what's it called, man? That's terrible. But she's good at writing emotions and writing characters in a way that they're completely unique to the book, because sometimes you'll read a book and there's 10 characters in it, but 4 of them are just kind of the same person, or they could be the same person. However, in this, she's very good at making distinctions between not only the sisters but a lot of the characters in this. But ultimately, this along with the next book that I'm going to show you here is in Pride and Prejudice. It's a similar story. It's a story of two girls who, this isn't two girls, this is a full family of girls who are looking to find love, and everything is about being rich and everything's about this and that. However, moving on to Pride and Prejudice, the mother in this is a lot more not a good person to me. I didn't think so. She was just like, I don't care who it is, you're going to marry someone and whether you're happy or not and things like that, and everything was about that. In this book, as opposed to Sense and Sensibility, you get a bit more of a comic relief from the dad, as well as the woman that they go live with. I can't remember her name. And this story is obviously a bit more famous, and Mr. Darcy and things like that, and Elizabeth, and the story of him being sort of this being the prejudice part, them having a preconceived notion about him, and it doesn't take it's not until the end of the book that anything happens between the two of them and things like that. So it was almost like Sense and Sensibility, except this time it worked out. This is a lot better than Sense and Sensibility. It's a lot more fleshed out. It's a lot more, as well as being fleshed out, it's also succinct, and I would say that it's more entertaining. There's less, so for large parts of this book you're kind of fucking slogging, man. It gets heavy, whereas this is a lot more succinct, and I can see why this is our most famous. I've also started reading a couple of her other books. I think the Mansfield Park is the next one in that thing, and I've read a little bit of that about Fanny and how she's moved to this house and things like that and settling in, but that's about as far as I went. But yeah, these two books they're good. I probably would revisit Pride and Prejudice. This, as I said, I read Austen very early on, so when I went on to other authors who I probably liked a bit more and were a bit more in the sort of subject matter I like, I can see the influence that Austen has had on a number of authors that I will show throughout these videos. So yeah, Jane Austen, thumbs up, man, thumbs up. Next we've got Emily Bronte with Wuthering Heights, which is one of the best books I've ever read. It was one of the first books that I had read when I started this last year, and it genuinely did have some sort of effect on me after I read it and things like that. It was very interesting. If you don't know the story, it's about a family who live in like Wuthering Heights, which is sort of a moorland and a very windy area of what I imagine to be England. And they're a very dysfunctional family, completely generationally. It keeps going down, and then just gets worse, and they're evil and things like that. But so Catherine forms a deep attachment to someone called Heathcliff, who's brought back to the house by their father, and he starts living with them. But he is a pretty evil guy, and he grows up with him and things like that. And it's just the story of Heathcliff and Catherine's love, basically, but how it intoxifies everything around him. Everyone around him gets affected by this deeply dysfunctional and toxic love that they have for each other. Heathcliff is easily one of the most interesting and malicious characters that I've ever read, without him being overtly, well, he is violent, but without him being overtly evil, not committing any, really bad acts. He's still really malicious and horrible, and the way that Emily writes this is in such a way that it feels that you're reading a gothic novel, which it is. It's a gothic novel, but the fact that she was in her 20s, early 20s when she wrote this is unbelievable. This is her only novel as well, and yeah, it's genuinely a great book. I would make a video on it on its own, because it's that good. It's one of the best things I've read so far. So yeah, Wuthering Heights. Then we move on to some Russian stuff here, which is Mikhail Bulgakov's The Master and Margarita, which is a satire written during the Soviet era, during Stalin's reign. It's the story of the devil coming to Moscow and wreaking havoc along with his other companions. It starts off with two Russian guys in a park, and suddenly the devil comes and sits next to them and tells them all these things, but they obviously don't believe it. This is set in Moscow during that era, so that everything was atheist and these things don't happen and all that. So despite it happening right in front of them, they'll say it didn't happen. People that do see it and see the devil do things get sent to asylums and things like that. So it's basically about them wreaking havoc on Moscow. And then it starts running parallel to that. There's a story of Pontius Pilate, which is during Jesus' crucifixion. Although he's not called Jesus, he's called like Nahotsri or something. And then the second part of the book is about the Master and Margarita, which is a sort of love story intertwined with a story of the group of demons or devils or whatever they are, who are wreaking havoc. So it's a very strange book. It's certainly not one that, now that I've read it twice now, but I still think there's hundreds that I've missed, and also it requires a lot of context of Soviet era life, which I haven't delved into. But from what I've read, of the two times I've read it now, it's one of the best things I've read. It's certainly unique, and then if you look up the context behind him writing this and what happened to him and things like that, it's very interesting. So yeah, I recommend this if you're into sort of satirical novels and something that's fucking weird. So yeah, that's Margarita. Then we have Anthony Burgess with A Clockwork Orange. This book I've read 4 or 5 times now. It's a very short book, you can do it in one day. A really good book. I sort of almost allegorical about, ultimately the whole thing is about, if you take someone's free will away from them, are they really a person anymore? If you take their choice away from them, are they really a person anymore? And also there's a bit of politics in it, because the character Alex DeLarge, in the latter part of the book, when he goes through the procedures that happen in A Clockwork Orange, once he gets out, there's a number of political groups who wish to curry favour with him in order to advance their own sort of agenda. So this book is sort of rich with all of these themes, despite the fact that it's a very violent book and it's very controversial and things like that. It's actually quite a dense book in terms of the themes that are in it. And the fact it's written in that sort of NADSAC language, which takes a bit of getting used to. I do have another edition of this where it has a glossary of all the words and things like that. But as you read it, you start to understand it. But yeah, this is a very good book, and it's almost philosophical, almost to me anyway. So Clockwork Orange, Anthony Burgess. Then we have a book that people. This was probably the first classic that I stumbled across that I didn't really like. I read the full thing, and I wasn't a big fan of it. Maybe I'll revisit it one day. But this is Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, which is the story of a man who is going to he's going into the heart of Africa in order to find a general called Kurtz. And I think he's in search of this guy Kurtz who's went missing, and it's basically the story of him traversing through colonial Africa and witnessing the atrocities that the colonisers are committing on the native people. And it's the journey to finding this Kurtz guy who winds up being some sort of lord of these native people. And it's the whole book is basically just like recanting. No, the whole book is telling you what colonial Africa was like during those times, and giving you an idea of what it's like without describing it. So the famous quote is at the back there, the horror. However, in this book they don't describe any of the horror, which you don't need to. But to me, it's a good idea badly realised, and a lot of it is you supposed to feel sorry for this guy who is working in colonial Africa and benefiting off this colonialism. So how many times have I fucking said colonial or colonialism or yeah, I just didn't like it. I didn't. There's a few films that are based off this book. For example, Apocalypse Now. Apocalypse Now is brilliant. So it's certainly like a good story. It's just I didn't take to it, man. So Heart of Darkness. Then we are on to Mr. Dostoevsky. I've read a couple of his short stories, a couple of his books as well, and this is what I've got here. So we have The House of the Dead and The Gambler, which is two different stories in one. So The House of the Dead is basically Dostoevsky writing about someone, which is basically based off a true story about him, but it's a guy that's just got into a gulag, and basically the life of living in a gulag and the people around him and what he sees and what happens and the relationships he makes throughout his entire sentence. It is quite heavy going. I think that it's one of my least favourite things that I've read from him, just purely because it's very verbose without having too much content to it. You could read 10 pages, 15 pages, and it just be about a poker tournament that happened, or it's not poker they play, whatever it is. It's just not. It's not one of his best anyway, not for me anyway. But the other story, The Gambler, is good. It's a sort of short story. I think it's about 200 pages in this, 100 and something pages, and it's about a casino hotel which is full of the elite, the social elite, and there's this guy you follow about who is called, what's he fucking called, man? Alexei? Is it Alexei? Alexei. He goes there and he witnesses all of this, and he plays a little bit of roulette, but he's kind of smart with it. And then arrives Granny, who's a character who is the hotel owner's sort of gran, and she starts to spend all of the inheritance that he's due to get on gambling. And it's basically, again, a story about gambling and where it can lead you down dark paths and things like that. And the way that it ends for Alexei is very sad, considering he was never interested in gambling in the first place. Good wee short story, written well. Yeah. One of the better works by Mr. Fyodor. Then we have The Big Boy, the main book by him that isn't Karamazov. This is Crime and Punishment, which again, this is one of the best books that I've read. Something that I'll probably go back to reading once a year. This is very much a slow burner. Any book that's built like this and has the sort of small text is going to be a slow burner. This is not the book that I expected it to be from reading the back of it. On face value, it's the story of a guy who's basically studying, but he feels like the world owes him something, and that if he only had money, he would be a lot higher up in society and he would be better, and he deserves to be higher up than he is in the social ladder. So he decides one day that he's going to steal from someone, and he's been planning it for a long time. He steals from an old woman, and it results in all sorts of problems. And basically the story is him starting to regret what happened, and also the fallout from committing that act. So the crime happens in the first sort of 100 pages, and then the rest of it is the aftermath of it and what happens to him and what happens to the people around him. And obviously there's a lot more side stories and things like that come with it. But this is a brilliant book and something that I would recommend, and I will probably do a separate story video about. And then finally we have Dostoevsky's White Nights. This is the Penguin Classics version. Got two short stories. One of them's called White Nights, and it's a story about a guy who meets a girl on a park bench, and the girl is in love with this man, but the man doesn't really care, and they strike up a friendship which comes close to being romantic and things like that. It's actually quite depressing, and Dostoevsky seems to have this theme of male characters who become completely enthralled with these women and basically give their lives up to be with them and things like that. Like in The Gambler, the main character Alexei Stepanovich, I think his name is, he is completely obsessed with this woman, and he basically becomes her sort of slave in all senses of the matter, apart from sexual. And he basically surrenders himself to her in different ways. And Dostoevsky seems to have this theme of sort of female power over desperate men, and it's less so like this, but there's also themes of that in this White Knight story. And then the second story is Bobok, which isn't as good. Bobok's it's okay, it's just a wee short one. But White Nights is the main one. I would recommend reading that. It's just interesting, and as I mentioned earlier on, this is the guy that I think was really into Jane Austen, because having read Jane Austen and reading this, you can see a lot of parallels in the way that he writes about love and the way he writes about women and the way that they talk and things like that. It's very similar. So yeah, the frustrating thing coming to the end of this is each and every one of these books I could talk for ages about, but as soon as I hit record, it just all leaves my head. But that's part one of this, of what I've read from A to D. So yeah, I think this will go over about 2 or 3 parts, and then that'll be it, because I've not actually read that much. However, I would like to talk a bit more in depth about these books, especially stuff like Crime and Punishment, Clockwork Orange, Master and Margarita, things like that. So there might be separate videos about that too, but that's part one done. Thanks for watching.